Hey guys, Catholic Christian here. Welcome. Pope Francis days ago released his autobiography entitled Hope. There it is, the autobiography. It was supposed to be released after his death, but he thought it was prudent, given the circumstances of our times, to release it now. If you haven't ordered it or purchased it, I suggest doing so. I will be doing just that. However, it has already received some uh, constructive criticism and non-constructive criticism, if I may. Okay. Now, I don't have the book in front of me, but there is a quote, or a passage rather, from the autobiography that certain theologians, apologists, and Catholic journalists and shows are critiquing, and they're kind of feeling a little uneasy about. So I want to look at this passage from the book and why people are getting a little uneasy, like I said, and what exactly it is they're critiquing, and maybe what it is they're not understanding correctly about what he is saying. Okay. So I'm going to play a clip from an EWTN show that displays the passage from his book and what everyone's kind of getting bent on a shape over. So I'll just go to the clip here, and they read it starting at, I believe, interesting. It's kind of weird. He misses the first line where it says, from a sociologic point of view. So I'm going to play this passage, and then briefly I'm going to, after the clip, kind of talk about it a little bit.
It is interesting to consider the phenomenon of traditionalism, this backwardism that regularly returns each century, this reference to a supposed perfect age that each time is another age. With the liturgy, for example, it has now been ruled that the possibility of celebrating Mass in Latin following the Missal prior to the Second Vatican Council must be expressly authorized by the Dicastery for Divine Worship, who will allow it only in certain cases. For this reason, that is unhealthy for the liturgy to become an ideology. It is curious to see this fascination for what is not understood, for what appears somewhat hidden, and seems also at times to interest the younger generations. This rigidity is often accompanied by elegant and costly tailoring, lace, fancy trimmings, rochets, not a taste for tradition, but clerical ostentation, which then is none other than an ecclesial version of individualism, end quotes.
Wow. There was a lot said right there. I'm going to actually back up here. So I'm not going to replay it. I'm just going to go back. You can see it on the screen, obviously. And I'm not going to dissect it too much. I'm just going to give you guys my thoughts. So obviously you guys in the United States and the West here know about the TLM, the traditional Latin Mass restrictions that have gone on in our diocese over here. And some people don't understand why that is. Some people are just straight up mad about it, mad at the Pope, at, the CDF and all that. But I want to let you know that Pope Francis is perfectly correct and appropriate, not only to do what he has done, but to say every word that he has said. Okay, you guys know I like Pope Francis, but I'm going to back it up. I'm not just biased here. So I think the first part that you have to recognize in what Pope Francis is saying is the word, or phrase, I should say, the phenomenon of traditionalism. Okay. That's in the third sentence there in the passage right there. Or not the third sentence, but the third line. The phenomenon of traditionalism. He does not say tradition in any which way. Capital T, lowercase t, liturgical tradition, piety, prayer tradition, nothing. He says traditionalism. He puts that ISM, that ism on there for a reason, right? Because most isms, not all, but most are ideologies, right? You think of communism, socialism, transgenderism, it goes on and on. and Marxism, whatever. You put an ism onto it, and not all the time, but a lot of the times it's this ideology that indoctrinates individuals or groups of people and blinds them intellectually and or spiritually. Just think about the ones I just mentioned. Now you're thinking, now how does this relate to the liturgy or the TLM? Well, if you think about it, in the United States, we've all experienced. Oh, let me back up. Let me preface this and say this. Here, I'm going to switch screens. Let me just say this. There is absolutely nothing wrong, nothing at all, with the traditional Latin Mass. I would even say, objectively, it's probably the most reverent and aesthetically pleasing type of liturgy that we have. Okay? So there's nothing wrong with it. It's not the liturgy. We're not talking about the traditional Latin Mass. That's not the problem here. Okay? It's how people are abusing it, or how people are, again, succumbing to this ideology that the TLM, right, is the only way of true reverent worship. Okay? Where they actually will isolate themselves from post-conciliar liturgical reform or just liturgy itself and the people that follow the Novus Ordo. Okay? So I've known people personally in my life. So not online, okay? I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on the comment section of this guy's channel, but in real life, people who have thought that if the mass is not said in Latin, it's invalid. Okay? We all know where they get it from, okay? But just the language part, they're not even talking about the liturgical part. I mean, I know the language has to do with liturgy, but just Latin. So these people, right? If there's no TLM that they can get to, within a certain radius, convenient radius, that is, they'll stay home. They will stay home. These aren't your ordinary sedevacantists, okay? They still believe that they are Catholics. They are in the jurisdiction of the Catholic Church, and everything applies to them except this one thing, the TLM. If it's not available, I'm out of here. And there was one person, I'm not going to name a name, there was one person giving a speech and it went viral, said, if there is not a TLM where you live, you need to move. I'm just going to leave that there. Okay. So, traditionalism, the ideology of it, where you are actually so infatuated with a liturgy that you unwittingly worship the liturgy instead of worshiping God. People don't know they're doing that, but there are people out there. They're so infatuated, and it's so important to go to a TLM that they will actually stay at home and, I don't know, say 20 decades of the rosary. I don't know, or whatever. That's the problem. But even more of the problem is the weaponizing against Vatican II, using the traditional Latin Mass, right? Roman Missal 62, all that stuff. They try to, whether it's deliberate or unwittingly, delegitimatize Vatican II, because as you know, Vatican II was very pastoral and all about liturgical reform. Hence the new Mass, the Novus Ordo, ecumenism, all that stuff. So the new Mass or Novus Ordo, right, comes out of Vatican II, and they pit Vatican II and the Novus Ordo, right? It's kind of like this one thing. They pit that against the TLM and the preconciliar church, right? That's what they're doing, whether they want to admit it or not. Okay? And that's just on the word traditionalism. So this backwardism that, again, going on, I'm reading from this slide, this backwardism that regularly returns each century. So what does he mean by backwardism? We're going to get into that. He has a whole article. He did an interview last year, guys, I think with some Jesuits, right? And he was asked all about this going on in the United States. So it's just, again, it's an ideology because he says ism, right? It's not like he's saying a return to our roots, a return to our tradition. He's saying backwardism to the point where people are just stuck in this, I don't know, the Council of Trent, the Tridentine era, right? where it's like they cannot have any type of liturgical progress or reform or any type of doctrinal development. Guys, that is Eastern Orthodoxy and in a sense Protestantism. I know it sounds weird, but I could qualify that. But that's not us. We progress. We don't alter, we progress. We don't change, we grow, if that makes sense. The substance, that is. Okay. That regularly returns each century. I don't know. Each century, I don't know if that's true. This reference to a supposed perfect age that each time is another age. So we're in this age, right? There's all this. Here, let me go to my. There's all this confusion, all this ambiguity, all this division, all this. Just the church is a mess. Blah 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 blah. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, we don't reform within. We go backward in an ideological sense, right? Backwardism. Okay. And then we just kind of, anybody that's in the present or wants to progress is just like an outcast, or you're a liberal progressive. Okay, we're the true conservative traditionalists. Okay, it's a problem. Okay, so he says, within, this is the last sentence, with the liturgy, for example, and then I have to fast forward, just give me a second here. With the liturgy, for example, it has now been ruled that the possibility of celebrating Mass in Latin following the Missal prior to the Second Vatican Council must be expressly authorized by the Dicastery for Divine Worship. Yeah, before I didn't mean the CDF, I meant the Dicastery for Divine Worship, who allow it only in special cases. Again, there's really nothing to break down there. For the reason that it is unhealthy for the liturgy to become an ideology. That's what it has become, you guys, whether you want to admit it or not. Now, I said before in preface, right? I said that the TLM inherently is probably the most beautiful Mass and the most reverent Mass. And in a sense, why not use it ubiquitously, everywhere, universally? Okay. So you can't pull that on us. Okay. It's not about that. But when people are using it to weaponize, when people are using it as an ideology to push this traditionalism agenda on other people and on the church, that's when it becomes a problem. So Pope Francis, as the pastor of the universal church, in a pastoral, prudent decision, restricted the Latin Mass just for those reasons I just said. Okay? It's not like he's this dictator that wants to make you mad and restrict access to the Latin Mass inherently. It's because there's this problem going on, specifically in the United States, where, like I said, people are infatuated with a certain liturgy where it's like they're worshiping the liturgy instead of God. Okay? Ideology is no bueno when it comes to stuff like this. Okay? Moving on, he says, it is curious to see this fascination for what it is not understood, for what it appears somewhat hidden. Sounds like Gnosticism. And seems also at time to interest the younger generations. Now, that is interesting to me. The younger generations. I'm just going to fast forward here, but the younger generations and the TLM. Uh, I don't want to say this word, but I kind of have to. So the TLMers, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Those who, not everyone is encapsulated in this ideology of traditionalism when it comes to the traditional Latin Mass. I get it, okay? Not everyone is guilty of this, okay, guys? But I think younger people are drawn into this. It's almost kind of like this esoteric mysticism, like this, curiosity and just. I mean, yeah, there's the beauty of it and the reverence and all that too, but it's like I want to be a part of like the select few, the select chosen, because I mean the majority go to the Novus Ordo. Let's just get that out of the way. I want to be that, that special reverent Catholic. I want to be, you know, again, this is not a big deal. I'm just going to bring this up, but you ever notice the young people that, I'm talking like 17 to 25. So late high school, college age Catholics, right? That are on fire, they have zeal and reverence, and stuff like that. But they almost it's like it's ostentatious. And he's going to talk about that. I'm not judging hearts. I'm not saying they want to be seen by others. Okay, I'm not. I don't know. I don't know why they do what they do. But it's so prevalent and common in this age group, in this Gen Z. You do not see boomers and millennials in proportion to this generation, doing it as much as the Gen Zers. And I'm talking about kneeling at communion for Mass. Now, is there anything wrong with kneeling at communion? Is there? No, of course not. It's probably more reverent than anything you could do. And it's a beautiful thing objectively. But what I see is all these younger people doing it and nobody else doing it. So I go to daily mass and most of the daily mass goers are, I would say, yeah, most of them are like retired or stay at home moms. Okay. They're either retired or stay at home moms. So sometimes they'll bring their kids or not. They're not receiving on their knees. And again, I know I'm talking about a couple parishes in my diocese. Okay. I get it, whatever. But why, anytime I see these zealous, college Catholics coming to mass, they're doing all these, extra, gestures and moves, like, the bowing and oh, how about this? The confession, through my fault. You got to make the whole place hear you. It's okay. I'm not judging. I really, if that's your thing, that's your thing. But anyways, yeah, the younger generations, I think they're just attracted to the TLM for it's almost like a cultish. The TLM has become like a cult. Not the TLM inherently. I'm just saying the people that are like infatuated and abusing it. It's this cult like status of ideology. That's why Pope Francis is saying what he says. And I will get to the article from last year. He goes more into that. Okay, so going back to the quote, he says, this rigidity, oh, that's the perfect word for what we're talking about, is often accompanied by elegant and costly tailoring, lace, fancy trimmings, rochets. Uh, Again, I think, this is where I'm kind of like, well, to me, that's not the biggest deal. But I think what he means is if that's what your focus, right? If your outward focus takes precedence over your inward dispositions, then you're not really trying to be traditional. You're just trying to be ostentatious. And that goes for the laity too. That's not just for the clerics, right? So for the laity, is there anything wrong with a chapel veil? No, it's a beautiful thing, right? I love it. I love it when women wear it. But you got to be doing it for the right reason, okay? You can't just be going in there acting like, you're self-righteous and sanctimonious. And I wear a chapel veil and I kneel at communion and I do all these extra moves that nobody knows about, these liturgical norms. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, if you're doing them for good reasons. So going on, not a taste for tradition, but for clerical ostentation, right? I want to be seen by others, seen by other men, my holiness, which then is none other than an ecclesiastical version of individualism. I mean myself wanting to be seen to the expense or to the exclusion of the common, we're all one, right? The community aspect. That's what the Mass is. That's why we say our Father, not my Father. It's communion, community, right? Church. Okay. So, real quick, I want to go to the article or an interview rather that he did last year talking about this in the United States. Okay. And I'm going to share my screen here. Whoops. I'm going to share my screen and go to the article here. Now, I'm not going to go over this whole thing, okay? I'm just going to highlight the things. Notice how I searched the word backward. Anyways, so Pope Francis last year was interviewed and he was asked a question. I would like to ask you a question as a Franciscan. Oh, yeah, as a Franciscan, but he's a religious brother. Last year, I spent a sabbatical year in the United States. There was one thing that made a great impression on me there and at times made me suffer. I saw many, even bishops, criticizing your leadership of the church. Gosh, imagine that. And many even accused the Jesuits, who are usually kind of critical resource of the Pope, of not being so now. They would even like the Jesuits to criticize your explicitity. Do you miss, because he's so vague and ambiguous and unclear, do you miss the criticism that the Jesuits used to make of the Pope, the Magisterium, the Vatican? Okay. And then he gives a law. I'm not going to go through all this, okay? What are we at? 19 minutes? Okay. I'm shooting for 30. I'm shooting for 30. Okay. So this is his answer. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Okay. You have seen in the United States, right? I'm always saying that. It's only in the United States, at least on this magnitude. The situation is not easy. There is a very strong reactionary attitude. Do you guys know what reactionary is? He's speaking of the political ideology of the far, far, far right conservative, right? We're talking an inordinate type of conservative. I'm conservative, guys. I'm pro-life conservative, so don't get mad at me. But he's saying reactionary. So on the left, it's called oh my gosh, it's escaping me. Radical? No. Yeah, radicalism. Radical left. On the right, it's reactionary. Okay. Well, what is he referring to? Let's move on. It is organized and shapes the way people belong, even emotionally. I would like to remind those people that being backward looking or backwardism, the ideology, is useless, and we need to understand that there's an appropriate evolution in the understanding of faith and morals as long as we follow the three criteria that Vincent of Lorraine already indicated in the 5th century. Okay, so now he's alluding to development of doctrine, right? Development of doctrine. This is the first saint, right? To my knowledge. Okay, he's a doctor. I think he was just proclaimed a doctor. I wish I had his quote up, but he explicitly talks about development of doctrine. Explicitly. Every non-Catholic says, well, St. John Henry Newman, you guys, gosh, it took you 1900 years to, get to this development. No, we have this. I can't get into it, but yeah, so development of doctrine, but I want to include in there liturgical development, like liturgical reform, canon law, like so legislative law, church law development. Okay, it's not just faith and morals, right? Okay. He says, in other words, doctrine also progresses, expands, and consolidates with time and becomes firmer, but is always progressing. Notice the words he chooses, guys. Does he say it alters or substantially changes? No. He says it expands, progresses, and consolidates. That's true development of doctrine. That's how doctrine evolves, especially against the backdrop of heresy, schism, and all like, right? Does that make sense? Okay. But people here in the United States, right? The reactionary political ideologues are scandalized by anything, any type of change. The death penalty. Oh my gosh, the Pope's a heretic. You know what I mean? Just any kind of change. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the word change. I hate that. But development, consolidation, growth, progression. Okay. But you know what I mean? That's what I mean. So if I say change, that's what I mean. Okay. Because I agree, like doctrine doesn't change, the dogma doesn't change. Okay. All right. But do you see where the ideology comes from? It comes from a political uh, ideology or a political stance where people are putting politics, their political standings before their religion, or at least their politics is shaping the way they view the church, doctrine, development, all that stuff, right? Because the conservatives in the United States, boy, liberal progressivism, oh, and then they have this correlation and they see, oh my gosh, they took, um, the death penalty, is inadmissible, or the blessing of gay individuals, right? Which is funny. Like people got all bent on a shave. How can you bless a gay union? Guys, a gay union doesn't even exist. It's ontologically impossible. How do you do that? Anyways, let's stay on track, guys. Come on. Come on. All right. But let's just go down here and then I'll be done. Uh nope, not that one. Yes, that one. I'm sorry. But some people opt out. They go backward. They are what I call India Triste, I think. Is that Italian? I think that's Italian. When you go backward, you form something closed, disconnected from the roots of the church, and you lose the sap of revelation. Gosh, like who could say that better? Could you? I can't, right? Because ideologies, what do the indoctrinations of ideologies do? They close your mind and make you narrow-minded, right? You cannot see out of your ideological box. right? That's how a lot of us live, especially when it comes to politics, right? Oh, I love Pope Francis. If you don't change upward, you go backward, and then you take on criteria for change other than those our faith gives for growth and change. And the effects on morality are devastating. The problems that moralists have to examine today are very serious, and to deal with them, we have to take the risk of making changes, but in the direction that I was saying. Okay. So, change, guys, you have to qualify and understand that it's development, it's growth, consolidation, right? We're not compromising and we're not being indifferent to sacred tradition, to scripture, right? And our liturgy. So take our liturgy, right? We've seen different types of liturgical reforms for the past 2,000 years. Do you think the Mass was said in Latin at the Last Supper or for the next how many years? I'm sure it was said in Greek. It was Hellenized. I get it, right? It was Hellenized, but maybe even Aramaic. Oh, of course it was said in Aramaic. What am I thinking at the Last Supper? But yeah, we've had tons of different liturgical reforms for the past 2,000 years. Like the Mass or the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, right? The Tridentine liturgical reform, Vatican II liturgical reform. I'm sure there are others. Okay. So let's just really quickly, I just want to use some scripture to back up where I'm coming from on defending Pope Francis's views and implementations of what he's doing to the traditional Latin Mass in the United States. Okay, so I don't know if I should. Yeah, I'll share my screen here. So Matthew 23. Okay, so y'all know about the Pharisees, right? Y'all know this. Y'all know this, but I'm gonna apply this to what has been going on in the United States, especially with the traditional Latin Mass and the way people are abusing it and using traditionalism and backwardism with that Mass. Okay, so verse 23, woe to you. Okay, do you guys know what woe means? That's pretty much like a condemnation of judgment publicly. Yeah, I would never want to be in that group. Anyways, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Whew, Jesus is being a little harsh here. For you tithe mint and dill and cumin. I got those in my cupboard. And have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Oh my gosh. Okay, guys, that's an obscure verse. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. So, the Pharisees, what were they infatuated with? I don't know if I should leave this up or go to my screen. What do you guys want to see? Okay, I'm not that pretty. The Pharisees were infatuated, obsessed, inordinately with what? The law and obeying the law to the T, right? I mean, it was a problem. It was a problem, especially in Jesus' day, and he called it out because externally they wanted to obey the law and be seen to have obeyed the law externally, hence why they're tithing the mint, dill, and cumin, right? Which are very small seasoning herbs. A tenth of mint, tithe means tenth. A tenth of mint and dill and cumin. But then what are they neglecting? Being merciful to others, having the love within their hearts, right? Faith, forgiveness. You know what I mean? That's the problem. That's why he calls them hypocrites. You're doing this, but you're neglecting that. Well, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel, right? What is that? Well, a gnat is an unclean animal or insect, if you want to say. So Jews were not allowed to eat gnats. Who ate gnats back then? Like, why? Why is that prescribed? You cannot eat gnats; it's unclean, right? But it's one of the smallest insects or animals, if you will, that the Jews were not allowed to consume, right? And so was a camel. I mean, people ate camel, right? They didn't swallow one whole, but that's why he's using hyperbole here. Okay. But yeah, the Pharisees, what they would do is they would pour they would pour liquids through like a strainer, right, to get the gnats out, right? They were so meticulous and dutiful to get the gnat out while swallowing a whole camel because both are unclean. So the little minute part of the law they paid attention to, but the weightier matters of the law, right? Love and justice and faith, you're neglecting. Hence, by doing that, they actually swallow a whole entire camel. Does that make sense? Okay. And then just the last one, verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup of the plate, but inside you're full of extortion and rapacity. Rapacity. Potato, potato. So, this is, if you get anything out of this video, if you've stayed with me, this is what it all comes down to and how it applies to the United States, Catholics, especially reactionary ideologues in the United States who put politics first, or at least lets their politics shape the way they view and practice their religion. This is it, you guys. What matters in religion, what matters in how we practice our faith, but especially in the way that we worship God, in a sense, has nothing to do with the language, the liturgy. Again, I said in a sense, so don't just write me off. The liturgy, all that stuff has nothing to do with that. You know what matters when you worship God? Your inward disposition and the virtue that you display, especially that of charity at Holy Mass. So let me go back to me. So if you're going to the TLM, right? But you're only going for this ostentatious, like, I go to the TLM, I kneel for communion, I wear a chapel veil, you know, I smell like incense when I get out, but whatever. If you're going for that, you are being Pharisaical. And I would argue, not everybody, okay, not everybody, okay, log into my own eye. Many in the United States have been doing that to the point where it's doing damage to the church and has done damage to the church. I've experienced this personally with friends in my life, right? I have. I've seen what it does to them and how they view other Catholics. Okay. Like we're just a bunch of hippie, liberal, progressive Catholics, and we don't care about reverence. Oh, I go to the TLM, no phones are going off, or no one's doing this, no one's doing that. It's just like, oh my gosh, like focus on worshiping the creator and not, in a sense, not what's going on externally, in a sense. You could go to the Mass the whole entire time with your eyes closed and be more reverent and give more due honor and worship to God than if you're doing all these motions and stuff like that. Again, the point is, what matters is the interior disposition and the love with which you express to our Creator. Does that make sense? Now, if you have the right, correct disposition interiorly, then yeah, then and it'll match your external whatever, chapel veil, kneeling for communion, smelling like incense. Great, then you got it. Then TLM is the what it's meant for. You know what I'm saying? So I know a lot of bishops, I won't say who, but bishops say like external, um, physical things in Mass are important. Amen. Amen. But they're secondary to your disposition, right? To the level of charity you have in your heart for God and for neighbor and what you give to God at Mass. If that disposition is there, then anything you do externally will be good because it matches your interior disposition. Just don't be a hypocrite. Don't be in mortal sin and do all this stuff and judge others and want to be seen by others. Okay? That's the point. Okay? So yeah, clean the inside of the cup, that's your heart, and of the plate, that's your heart, that the outside may also be clean. Does he say clean the outside first or the inside first? The inside, because that takes precedence. Okay? The law or liturgy or worship is only good insofar as what's inside of your heart and the right disposition is ordered towards. Seriously, you actually could do so much more damage at Mass to your own soul by being ostentatious or wanting to be seen. I know I just said that, or whatever. I mean, you almost might as well just sit there and do nothing. All right. So Pope Francis, Autobiography, order it. I'm going to order it. Maybe I'll do a whole review on it. I don't know. But yeah, there have been a few that have given some unimpressed criticisms. That's fine. That's not a big deal. I'm not really worried. They can think what they want to think. But I really think, guys, mass is mass. It is. Don't get it is. It's I mean, the sacrifice of the mass at a Novus Ordo is the sacrifice of the mass at the TLM. Okay, just make sure you get your interior dispositions ordered, the love of God on your heart and for neighbor, and go to mass and just lay it all out, right? In a good way, obviously, not holy. So yeah, thank you. Please subscribe, like, share. Praise be Jesus and Mary, and pray for Pope Francis. I love him.